Justin Jefferson thinks he can be the best wide receiver in the league by the end of this year. You going to bet against him? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Viking. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, and make sure you stick around to the end of the show for a very special announcement, which if you follow me on Twitter, you already know about, but if you don't, then stick around. I got something you're going to like. Today, I want to talk about a quote that made the rounds over the weekend. And by the way, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered with this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, around Sunday, Justin Jefferson said that in an interview with Complex answered a whole bunch of things. It was very clearly a sponsored thing for his sponsorship with Lids, but you still might want to read it because it's Justin Jefferson talking about LSU and having fun. But one of the questions was, are you the best receiver in the NFL? And his answer was like, nah, that's Davante Adams. He's really good over there. But you know what? By the end of this year, it's going to be me. Which I love that because, like, it's very cocky. It's like glorious, wide receiver cockiness, but it's also like, it's very sincere, You ask a lot of players, hey, are you the best in the NFL? And, like, a lot of them will say yes because that's the mentality you kind of have to make it this far. But I love the idea of, like, well, I'm being objective here, all right? Davante Adams is the best. Come on, let's all be realistic. But afterwards, then it'll be me. Like, really proved his objectivity, and then that now that I've proven my objectivity, let me tell you, it's going to be me. I love that. So here's the deal. There's, I'm going to say, a little bit of precedent for Vikings wide receivers, young Viking wide receivers, saying completely outlandish things and then achieving them. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Today's going to be a lot of a Randy Moss episode, so be very happy about that. But before we do that, this is not even that crazy. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a huge homer, but like we just went over the betting odds for Justin Jefferson in terms of yards and touchdowns and catches and stuff. He's like second in like categories. Like he's top 5 in everything. In terms of betting odds. So, like, the betting market expects him to be top 5. Isn't that much more of a stretch to say, oh, yeah, he'll be, like, regarded as the best. Right now, he is second in terms of over-under for yards. The only guy above him is Cooper Kupp, which, like, of course. But, is Cooper Kupp going to replicate what he did last year? A lot of that had to do with the very unique way McVay runs his offense. And is McVay going to do something different? Or our defense is going to try to, are they going to adapt in a different way? And then McVay's going to have to find a new trick. And it's going to be like the Allen Robinson year or something, So it could go a bunch of different ways in LA. Or maybe it does go the same way. And Cooper Kupp gets, 10,000 yards again. And that's all fine. But like, I don't know. If you were to bet on who ends up getting the most receiving yards in the league, you can probably find something like that at BetOnline if you wanted to. Jefferson would be like second then, like according to those odds. Okay, so is it that much of a stretch to say I'll be first, especially if you're considering you're asking Justin Jefferson himself? It's just not that crazy of a thing to say. And we kind of talked about it a couple of episodes ago. So, if you want more in-depth, you can listen to that. But in general, they're probably going to pass at a higher volume. You've got Kirk Cousins, who's a very high volume, get the ball out quick and live to fight another day kind of quarterback. From like a fantasy, from a volume perspective, that makes that bodes very well. That's very good for fantasy things. So like you can see it kind of coming up, and he's going into his third year, and he's like, I'm going to get over 1,600 yards, which if he got 1,600 exactly, that would be a regression. So I don't know. It doesn't seem that insane, but obviously people are going to say, regression to the mean. And like his over under in terms of yards would be a regression. It would be actually, if it was 1395, that's less than he got last year and the year before that. And if you remember the year before that, he wasn't fully involved until about halfway through the season because he was still learning the playbook. So I don't know. The idea of Justin Jefferson being the best receiver in the league, like I don't know, why not him? There's a bunch of people it could be, and this is always the way I feel about wide receivers. There are 10 top 5 receivers, and there are 20 top 10 receivers. If that makes sense, like you can kind of make an argument for everybody being like one of those elites, and I think Justin Jefferson is one of those 10 top 5 receivers, and however you want to order them, I get really bored really fast, so I don't really care. Do whatever you want. But I think Justin Jefferson is firmly one of those guys. It could be Cooper Kupp, could be Davante Adams, could be Stephon Diggs. Justin Jefferson certainly is one of the options. And so for him to say that, I don't even think it's that cocky or outlandish. I think it's like a reasonable prediction that any Grambler worth his salt might give a second thought to. But really, with wide receivers saying stuff like this, it just reminds me, and he's not a rookie, and this was Randy Moss's rookie season, but it reminds me of this moment in Randy Moss right after he got drafted. And if you remember, he was really mad, and we'll tell that whole story. But it's very Mossy, and Moss said some outlandish things, made some pretty crazy predictions about himself, and then made them come true. I don't know. Feels like something that could happen again, not just because of the precedent, but because this feels like something like that could happen. So I want to get into it and I wax poetic about Randy Moss. I'm really just looking for an excuse to talk about Randy Moss, and I don't think any of you will be too mad about that. But first, let me talk to you about the good old Gramble. You can go bet on Justin Jefferson. Do you think he will get over under 1395? Because he says 1600. So if you think he's even close to close, you can go bet on that at betonline.net. You can bet on a whole bunch of premier wide receivers and tight ends. Thielen's on there too. You can bet on any Vikings game, their total win total, where they'll place in the division. And you can also bet on women's basketball. MLB, did you know the Twins are leading the Central Division? I just learned that. I don't know how long that's been a thing, but I'm here, guys. I learned it. You can find all that stuff, golf, tennis, MMA, whatever, at betonline.net. You can do player props. You can even bet right in the middle of a game with their live betting module. That's at betonline, where the game starts. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Today on Locked On NFL, we are going to start talking about it. BetOnline gave us a list of the 50 most valuable players in the NFL in terms of how they affect betting lines. There's multiple Vikings on there, and we are going to start going through them. So check that out at Locked On NFL. On this show here, Locked On Vikings, thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. We've been talking a lot about some history, and Randy Moss is somebody that I love talking about. Everybody does, because he rules. But so when Randy Moss got drafted, it was 98, right? Very famously, the draft sort of didn't want anything to do with Randy Moss. He was a problem kid. He had a rap sheet. He was seen as like a distraction, a problem kid. He had a lot to say. He wore those sunglasses at the Heisman, and that wasn't a very, professional thing to do. More than a little dog whistling going on. And in the 90s, that was kind of how that sort of thought manifested itself, so to speak. But for one reason or another, a whole bunch of people just did not want anything to do with him, including people in teams. And I think some of that started with the way like the media covered him. And so he did not like the media, Randy Moss. And he still doesn't like the media. I mean, there's that 30 for 30 Rand University. A lot of people really love it. Randy Moss hates it. He doesn't like the way it portrayed his town. And he just always, every time he thinks about media, he's in media and he still thinks this. But he sees it as like, they're not telling the whole story. They're only telling what's convenient to the story. They're telling a movie, but a movie's going to omit parts of reality. And so there's always going to be parts of reality missing. And so he gets like frustrated with that. So when he was initially drafted, he fell all the way to 21 to the Vikings, right? And people were asking him, hey, what gives? How do you feel about that? You fell so far, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to rip up the league. That was what he said. I'm going to rip up the league. I think later he said, I'm going to destroy the league. He didn't want to excel. He didn't want to just be good. He wanted to change it. He wanted to punish the league. And he did. He changed the way the league played defense. And I think that's a really cool story that still affects football today that's worth telling, the schematic version of it. But beyond that, just the idea of, the cocky young wide receiver that hasn't paid his dues yet, getting all sorts of hate in the media, and basically got hate from Minneapolis media until he left. And even then, then he got torn apart in Oakland because he didn't have a great year in Oakland. When he went to New England, he got torn apart by Boston media too until that was 2007, and then eventually Undefeated kind of took over everything. But like, he was not beloved. And I think part of those quotes, were just him saying, like, look, you're going to take whatever I say and turn it into whatever makes me look bad because that gets you, I mean, it was the 90s version of clickbait, right? Like, that gets you headlines, and that gets the viewers and readers and stuff. So you're going to say whatever. So I'm going to say whatever. Like, doesn't matter. So I'm just going to mess with you and I'm going to say what's fun and I don't care what you guys think of me. And I always got that vibe from Randy Moss when it came to the media. And I think it's deserved, honestly. I think it's totally fair. So when he says that, I mean, he said, I want to rip up the league. I want to destroy the league. And he was, of course, right. And if you're not familiar with what made Moss great, maybe you're around my age, you were just a kid watching Randy Moss. You didn't have like a super analytical vibe watching him run routes, right? Just a big, cool player go boom, right? But what made Randy Moss great was nuance. And I think that's what really separates, like, a good receiver can run a route, can do all the things, gets a good route stem, can get off the line of scrimmage and all that stuff. A good wide receiver can do that. KJ Osborne can do all that stuff. He's a good wide receiver. He's not one of the greats. You want to be one of the greats. And this is what makes me feel like Justin Jefferson, whatever he says he can do, he can do. Like, I'm not betting against him at all because he's gotten the nuance. And I mean, nobody had nuance like Randy Moss had nuance. I mean, he was crafted by God to make cornerbacks cry. Like, physically, of course, the lanky, the speed, and the catch radius and all that stuff. But the way he ran routes and stuff, I mean, he was practically his own offensive coordinator. I mean, it was, Randy Moss will get open downfield. There were plays that were just that. That was just, Randy Moss will just be open downfield, and for whatever reason, whoever was tasked with covering him won't be covering him. And it's just up to Randy Moss to make that happen. Not just, I'm going to run past you. And he could, you had to give him a crap load of cushion, right? Because he could run past you, and he used that as a tool. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just agility or winning contested catches and stuff. It was just, it was like vigorous tape study. And it was so like understanding your strengths and weaknesses. If you like to open your hips up too early, he is going to take advantage of that, and he's going to kill you on 9-yard curls all day long, and probably make you miss a couple of tackles on the way too, and make huge plays out of it. Like one of the famous Thanksgiving 1998 plays where he just makes a guy miss a tackle on a stupid little out route. But beyond that, he had so many little tips and tools. It wasn't just like agility, and we talk a lot about that. You look at like a wide receiver's 3-cone. When we get into the draft, we look at that 3-cone and we think of that as like a proxy for their ability to celebrate, their agility. Ooh, if you got a short receiver with a good 3-cone, oh, that guy's a shifty slot. He's going to get open on little whip out routes. And yeah, that helps, but part of it too is just being able to set stuff up and being really good at selling things. And it's not just physical agility. It's not just explosion. Randy Moss had that in droves as much as anybody. But there was this extra layer to it that was thought out and that was like tailored. And there was so much of a plan to it. That's what's amazing to me is every route had so much of a plan to it. That's why I say he was his own offensive coordinator. There was so much design to it that was always meant to get that particular cornerback to make the mistake that that guy tends to make. It was all so custom, and that made him utterly impossible to cover, right? And so he would be there. My favorite do I have to pick a favorite move of Randy Moss? A couple of my favorite moves Randy Moss had. One would be the shift of gears, right? He would run 80%, And you would have to run 100% to keep up with his 80 because he's Randy freaking Moss. And then the ball would be in the air. And right at the end, he would kick in that last 20%, and you were hopeless because you're already going 100, and he would just effortlessly accelerate away from you. And he would get super open. A lot of those passes where you go watch his highlight reel. There's a video on YouTube that's all of his 40-yard touchdowns, just the 40+ yard touchdowns. And it's 10 minutes long. And it's like, I don't think it's replays or anything like that. It's like just the clip, and it's 10 minutes long. It's insane. But in a bunch of those, it's the broadcast angle, right? So the quarterback throws, it pans over, Randy Moss has left some guy in the dust. But if you get the chance to watch him do that, a lot of the times that guy's running step for step with him until the ball's already in the air or until a certain point in the route, and then Randy Moss kicks it into an extra gear. It's like having a cut in a route that doesn't have cuts in it. It's, you get your separation at the breaking point of the route. Well, for him, he can actually have a breaking point in the route without having to change directions because he can change his speed so crazy. I thought that was awesome. And then there's the late hands thing. So what you tell cornerbacks when they're behind, when they, let's say, you're covering Randy Moss and he dusts you off the line of scrimmage because he's Randy Moss. What they teach you is, look, eventually he's going to have to turn his head around and start looking for the ball. When he does that, he'll slow down. He has to. That's because he's, not at full sprint anymore. He's looking for the ball. When he does that, you should be able to catch up. But you can't do that if you are also looking for the ball. So you have to catch up. And then once you've caught up, wait for him to turn around, look at where his eyes are going, look at where his hands are going, and put your hand in there. Just try to get your hand in there, right? Mike Zimmer preached that a lot with corners, and it made guys like Xavier Rhodes really good even at times when they were beat because they could still try to make a play on the ball. The problem is, and I've never seen anybody in the world do this like Moss does it ever. In the whole, there have been amazing wide receivers, but nobody did this like Moss did. He trained his eyes not to widen. Cornerbacks would know you're natural, right? You look around, and then when the ball is coming, your eyes would widen a little bit because you're focusing on it. It's like an adrenaline reflex. And Randy Moss, at least legend has it, his eyes wouldn't widen. So cornerbacks wouldn't know when the ball was coming, and even that move didn't work. And he would win a lot of contested catches that way. Or if the ball was underthrown a little bit, he would be able to come back and get it that way. There's all kinds of awesome stuff. So you had to double him. It's all you could do is bracket him and hope the quarterback looked elsewhere. Didn't help when elsewhere was Jake Reed and Chris Carter and Robert Smith. But Jesus, you got to take your chances with something. So what that meant is that defenses had to figure out a way to reliably have a safety over the top of Randy Moss. And you can't do that with a single high safety because they can just put put him on the sideline and the safety will never get over there in time. So you had to be two safeties. And if you have to be two safeties, you got to figure out how to be two safeties against a team that has Moss, Carter, Reed, and then Dante Culpepper throwing bombs to those guys. It's an unreal problem, and the solution to it changed the NFL forever. And that's kind of how it goes. Somebody presents an unsolvable problem, and the solution to that problem is what the next innovation is. So that's going to be what's next. But first, let me talk to you about Dave. Dave is an app that can help you out if you are in dire financial straits. The genesis of Dave is from Mark Cuban, and he didn't like that there were overdraft fees from the bank. If you go $10 under because you were just waiting for your next paycheck to come and you needed to buy a lunch that day or something, that $10 can quickly balloon into a lot more money. And Dave wants to fix that. So if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're struggling to make ends meet, Dave can help you get out of a pinch. There's no interest. There's no credit check. That's really important. And you can get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. You can tackle all those expenses, and millions of people have already downloaded Dave to get the financial relief they need. So if you're in a pinch, you need a little bit of extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Future you. Well, thank you. So imagine you're a defensive coordinator And you need to keep two safeties over the top at all times. You need to, because Randy Moss can attack either end of the field. Because he's fast enough, he could also be doing like an over route or something, and your safety can't keep up with that if he's on the wrong side of the field. So you can't just have a safety shade over to his side either. Like, that doesn't work, right? So you need to have two high safeties. And honestly, you need an extra safety for Chris Carter most of the time anyways, too. So you need two high safeties. It's non-negotiable. You have to do it all day. Back in those days, two high safeties was something you would do in certain situations or against certain matchups, but it wasn't like the norm. It wasn't as much of a bread and butter as it had used to be. There's a lot more single high going on those days to help solve some of the vaunted run games of the 90s, the Barry Sanders stuff. And so, like, if you asked Tony Dungy about this, who was former Viking defensive coordinator and then was doing that with the Bucs at the time, he had a whole bunch of experience from his time in Pittsburgh, from when Cover 2 was much more popular back in the 70s. And he took a whole bunch of those concepts, adapted them, and modernized them. And those concepts in Pittsburgh kind of morphed into what we know now, what was coined as Tampa 2. The Tampa 2 was sort of the answer to Randy Moss. The Bucs, if you remember, were in the NFC Central at the time. So they ran into Randy Moss twice a year. They had to have something like that. And the kind of resurgence of the Tampa 2 was an answer to teams like the Vikings or teams like the Rams, the greatest show on turf. These crazy high-flying dome teams that played on AstroTurf and everybody was faster on it, and all these 40-point-a-game teams. The Tampa 2 was kind of their answer to that. It made it way harder to go deep. But the problem with Cover 2 is you got, one guy on that catches one half of the field, another guy that catches another half of the field, and then in the very middle, you've got a seam. That's why they call it a seam. You've got a little line in the middle where kind of is no man's land. Whose job is it? Are they going to be lined up, cheating too far to the outside because you got Randy Moss over there on the sideline, and then you just send whatever tight end or send Jimmy Kleinsaucer up to the seam, and nobody's going to be there. Nobody's going to be close enough, and you could just hit him for a big gain. That is how Cover 2 kind of died. That was the way to attack Cover 2 back in those days. And so what you did was I always think of it as a Brian Urlacher. He was the Tampa 2 kind of the post linebacker, post safety kind of hybrid thing. And you would basically have a linebacker drop a whole bunch deeper than he usually does. And it leaves a little bit of a hole right in front of the center, if they wanted to run a stupid little short thing. But you'd rather have that than, 15 yards over the seam. So you needed somebody that was rangy and athletic and played like you would see a linebacker today, but also was enough of a thumper to be useful in the run game. So you needed these real unicorn players. And that's what made guys like Brian Urlacher so special, was because they enabled the Cover 2 or the Tampa 2. And the Tampa 2 was a huge deal in the aughts, right? And it's honestly coming back a little bit as teams go more four wide and stuff like that. And as teams move away from run games, it gets a little bit more okay to drop everybody a little deeper, align everybody a little bit deeper, as run pass ratios sort of favor pass more and more and more and more. Tampa 2 is starting to become a better and better and better idea. But really, Tampa 2 defined the league for so long, kind of up until Pete Carroll's Cover 3 became the wave, which is still in a way the wave, but is starting to, phase out, and we're answering it with, I don't know, I guess Fangio stuff. I don't really know. Cover 6? But a lot more like two high split safety quarters and all that stuff that we have now. Tampa 2 defined the league for a long time. Pittsburgh still ran stuff like that. Of course, Tampa Bay themselves in 2002, they won that Super Bowl. You had the Bears in their Urlacher Monsters of the Midway Part 2 heyday. A whole bunch of teams were running that Tampa 2 stuff. And Randy Moss was one of the catalysts that made that Tampa 2 necessary. So when he said, I'm going to destroy the league, he kind of did. He sort of made everybody go back to the drawing board and rethink the way that they played pass defense. And it had an effect that spread throughout the league. The league is not the same since Randy Moss absolutely punched it in the face. And I think that's awesome. So I promised you an announcement. Again, if you follow me on Twitter, you know. But if you don't, I am going to be releasing a 7-part, fully fledged in-depth series on the history of the Minnesota Vikings. It's why I've been doing history on Locked On Vikings, because my research can kind of double as podcast topics, and some of the stuff you've heard on here are little stories or profiles and stuff that I'm either auditioning for the series, trying to figure out how it feels, or stuff that didn't make the documentary series but is still worth telling. So I'm going to tell you here. Like I told a lot more of Bud Grant's backstory that's not in the docuseries because of the way that flowed, but I thought it was worth telling, so I told it here. So that's kind of why we've done that instead of the normal story time thing that I've done the last couple of years. If you've been listening for a long time and you were expecting, to hear the backstories of undrafted free agents and stuff, that's why that didn't happen this year, because I was doing the history documentary. So the first one goes up on July 30th. There will be more information later about where you can find it, where you can watch it, and all that stuff. But I just want to tell you guys, I'm so excited. I've been keeping this thing a secret for months, and I've been talking to people if you're on the Discord about it, but I'm just so excited to share it with you. It has completely rejuvenated my relationship to the Vikings. I know a lot of people were like, oh no, I don't want to hear about the history of the Vikings. The history of the Vikings is sad. And it is. But I think the way that I've approached it is it has become a very personal thing that's very much about, and it's my voice, right? I can't not do this, but it is through my experience of the Vikings and my perceptions of the Vikings. And in doing this and going back through everything from the 60s, 70s, 80s, all the way through everything, it has reestablished the emotional part of my connection to the team and given me a much fuller, more realized sense of why I'm here, why I'm doing this, why I'm sitting in front of, if you're watching on YouTube, a purple background with a gnome in it and a bunch of books and stuff, why I'm doing any of that, and why I sit down to watch on Sundays. I have really confident answers to those questions that I don't know if I had before I started this, and I hope that it can do something similar for you. So I am going to talk a lot more about this. If I can, on Mondays, I'm going to talk about the episode that went up that Saturday, because there's just little thoughts and meta things that I just want to share with you guys. It won't get in the way of actual Vikings coverage, though, so if you don't care about that and you'd rather just hear about how camp is going and stuff, don't worry. We're totally not going to skip over that stuff. That is absolutely going to be priority one, and if there's any huge news, we'll put the meta DVD commentary stuff off to another day, or we can even skip it if we have to. But I'm just really excited about it. I hope you can hear it in my voice. I'm super, super hyped about it. More information coming out next weekend probably is when I'll tell you more logistical stuff, links where you can find stuff. But July 30th is when the first of the 7 parts goes up. So really excited to share all that stuff with you. I will see you all tomorrow. It's Twitter Tuesday, so ask me questions. Locked On NFL or at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter. Locked On Vikings podcast at gmail.com. You can send me questions, or if you have what you think are particularly emotional reactions to any Vikings moment, like the miracle or anything, send me pictures or video. I want to see your emotions. I want to see whatever it is you're reacting to. Born raw. I just want to see that. Send that to lockedonvikingspodcast at gmail.com. If I really like it, it might actually make it into the doc. But no promises. So I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.